Who's going nuclear this week and blowing up in your fantasy lineup? Who's going to be a landmine and make you blow up when they don't reach your expectations? Today, I've got several players that I'm going to be diving into that were fringe start players for me. Guys that we could put in our fantasy lineup, but there were some things that were a little bit concerning. And we're going to talk about what guys are going to go nuclear, the players with the best chance of reaching their ceiling, and who's going to be a landmine, players that will end up being way closer to their floor than what you want. And keep in mind, this is not a start and sit video. Depending on your roster and your lineup, you might be able to deal with more risk than somebody else who needs to play it super safe this week. Those are how you should be making your decisions. This is purely about players that have the best chance to reach their ceiling versus players that have a high ceiling but might be closer to their floor. First up is Jaylen Warren, and he is off to a very solid start in 2025. Right now with Jaylen Warren, it's not all about production, it's about the situation as well. You got a guy like Caleb Johnson, who's in the doghouse right now after a very critical special teams mistake last week. So he's not really getting a whole lot of looks. He wasn't anyway before that. And Kenneth Gainwell, I mean, he's being put out there. He's getting snaps, and he's getting a decent amount of snaps, but he's not doing anything. He's not being utilized in the game plan the way Jaylen Warren is. Through the first couple of weeks of the season, Jaylen Warren's floor is 12.9 fantasy points, and he's reached a high of 15.4 fantasy points. And this week, going up against New England, who's allowing just under 22.5 fantasy points to opposing running backs, he's got a really solid opportunity ahead of him. Yes, New England has been pretty solid on the ground against the run so far. They are allowing the 7th fewest rushing yards to opposing running backs. But last week, Jaylen Warren had 88 receiving yards. And we know that Jaylen Warren has always been very strong in the passing game and able to help out his offense through the air. This week with New England, it might be a little bit tougher on the ground, but they are currently allowing the 3rd most receiving yards to opposing running backs. So for me this week, Jaylen Warren, knowing that he's getting the good touches, he's getting the touches that are going to make fantasy points happen in this backfield, regardless of how often Kenneth Gainwell is on the field, Jaylen Warren has a chance to go nuclear. Bucky Irving was a late addition to this video, and I struggled going back and forth on whether or not I wanted to include him. I was a big Bucky Irving supporter early in the offseason, and so far to begin the year, he hasn't been bad. Last week, he was really solid in the passing game. Overall, running the football hasn't been awful as of yet. They are missing a couple of offensive linemen, and that could have been a reason for the slow start. But then unfortunately, another injury happened. Cody Mauch is going to be out for the rest of the season, one of their starting guards, and they are now going to be 3 offensive linemen down going up against the New York Jets this week. Now, Bucky Irving to begin the season, his floor is 12.5 fantasy points, and then his ceiling last week was 15.1. And the Jets are allowing almost 25 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But Bucky Irving, unfortunately this week for me, is going to be a landmine. Now, does that mean you are sitting him? Absolutely not. If you own Bucky Irving, you've got to play him. You just have to be prepared for the fact that unfortunately running the football could be a little bit difficult this week given the fact that they're missing 3 starters on the offensive line. And that's why I decided to include Bucky Irving in this video, because as of Tuesday when I put out my running back start and sit video, Cody Mauch had not been injured as of yet. And now because of that injury, this is going to make a pretty large impact, and I felt that I needed to update Bucky Irving and my thoughts on him for this week. So now, am I starting him? Yes, he's still going to be a start, but his ceiling is not nearly as high as I thought it once was, and his floor is probably more attainable this week. I gotta say, I did not love what I saw when I did a film review of Ashton Jeanty for our members. If you're interested in getting access to that film review study, all you need to do is become a member here on YouTube. Click that join button down below and you're going to get access to a ton of exclusive content, including the film review videos that I do throughout the season. But there were several things that I keyed in on that I did not love, that the rookie running back needs to clean up. Now, is it detrimental to his long-term success? No, there's still plenty of time for him to be a very good NFL running back. but there are some things that are concerning that are going to hold him down at the beginning of the season until he starts to fix those. Now, from just a purely game plan perspective, Las Vegas has thrown the ball 77 times in 2 games so far this season. They are really relying on the pass, which, in my opinion, doesn't make a ton of sense because that is not the type of team that Pete Carroll is used to coaching. But this is also going to be a tough matchup. Washington is currently allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. To begin the season, Ashton Jeanty has a low of 5.9 points, and his ceiling has only been 11. Washington is allowing just under 15 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Ashton Jeanty, I'm sorry, man. I gotta list you as a landmine this week. I still think he's got plenty of potential, not only in his career, but for this season. But for right now, I think the floor is going to be way closer to his average fantasy points than what a lot of owners would like. I think Jatavian Sanders could be a big part of the Carolina offense as long as they continue to utilize him that way. And we know at the tight end position, big games can come and go. Volume comes and go. Their usage changes from week to week. But for Jatavian Sanders, he needs to be the number 2 target on this team behind Tet McMillan. And this week doesn't seem like the best matchup in the world, so you might be shocked to learn that I've got Jatavian Sanders listed as going nuclear this week because of what he did last week, and I am keeping my fingers crossed they continue moving forward. Right now, Atlanta is only allowing 1.1 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, so clearly that's not a lot. Sanders only scored 3.7 points his first week, but the second week he went up to 8.9 fantasy points. That's a pretty big jump. And the reason for it, he had 9 targets, 7 receptions, and 54 receiving yards last week. Now, the reason that I'm not as skeptical of Jatavian Sanders being able to keep that going is the fact that Bryce Young has 90 passing attempts in 2 games right now. Carolina is slinging the rock. And like I said, if Sanders can become the number 2 target on this team, seeing 7, 8, or 9 targets every single week is absolutely attainable. On top of that, Sanders is currently playing 66% of the snaps. We saw how difficult Atlanta made life for the Minnesota offense last week, and you have to imagine that their pass rush could end up getting after Bryce Young as well. The name of the game this week for Carolina, get the ball out quickly, and Jatavian Sanders could be a big part of that. I have found when recording this episode that it's almost impossible to hide my chubby. No, not that, my shirt, my chubby shirt. Come on, Headliner Nation, head out of the gutter. My shirts from Chubby are some of the most comfortable shirts that I own, and I can literally wear them anywhere for any occasion. Now, my Lions Chubby, I like to wear when I record because I gotta rep my Lions, who looked a whole lot better last week, but also I feel great recording in it. I look good, I feel good, look good, play good. That's the name of the game. And if you want to rep your NFL team, you can do so right now by heading on over to Chubby's and using code Headliners for $10 off of your purchase. And we're working with Chubby's this season to help launch their new NFL line. It's the same comfort, the same material that you've come to expect from Chubby's, but with your favorite team's logo on it. So unless you're a fan of the Chicago Bears and you don't want to show everybody what team you love, head on over to Chubby's, use the link in the description below, code Headliners for $10 off of your purchase, and make sure that you're repping your team by using Chubby's this season. I want to get super excited and just scream that it's Kenneth Walker week, but I guess technically Kenneth Walker week was last week. Unfortunately, we didn't really foresee that happening given how often Zach Charbonnet had been playing throughout the first 2 weeks and his snap percentage. Earlier in the week during the start and sit video, I listed Kenneth Walker as a fringe start just because this is a guy that had a big week last week. But Zach Charbonnet still had more touches and played more snaps. But now we need to update the situation because Zach Charbonnet is questionable for Sunday now. Charbonnet has been limited in practice all week long. And maybe by the time this video comes out, that will have changed a little bit and Charbonnet could be in or he could be out. but it doesn't matter because Kenneth Walker is going to be a start regardless for me. Based on his performance last week when he had 13 carries for 105 yards and 1 touchdown, and the fact that Zach Charbonnet has been banged up and hasn't practiced in full this week. Oh, and on top of it, the New Orleans Saints are currently allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. I am going with Kenneth Walker being a nuclear option for me this week. This could be the week where he finally goes back to seeing the majority of the snaps now that we know that he's fully healthy and Zach Charbonnet isn't. Walker had 18.3 fantasy points last week, and New Orleans is currently allowing 25 fantasy points per game over the first couple of weeks to opposing running backs. Kenneth Walker has a great opportunity to go nuclear this week. As long as he runs the football just as effectively as he did last week, the RB1 is finally back. You can call this a gut play if you want to, but I think DJ Moore could go nuclear this week, and I've got a couple of reasons why, and there's some stats here obviously, but there is just a feeling that Ben Johnson is smart enough to realize his offense doesn't look great right now, and he needs to get DJ Moore more involved. Through the first 2 games of the season, he's had 7.1 fantasy points in each of those. But this week, he gets a Dallas matchup where they're currently allowing 44.65 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That is the 3rd most in the NFL. So here's my reason why. Number 1, I feel like this is a game where there's going to be minimal running for the Chicago Bears. Are they going to try to run it? Yes, but given the fact that their defense has been so poor to start the season, Dallas is probably going to put up a fair amount of points, and Chicago's probably going to have to try and keep up. So that's point number 1, negative game script. The more negative game script we have, the more opportunity for DJ Moore. Number 2, Rome Odunze has been very good through the first 2 weeks of the season, and this is a guy that was a sleeper candidate for me to begin the year. So I'm excited to see how well Rome Odunze is doing, and there's no doubt that it's probably affected DJ Moore's production a little bit. But here's the thing. With how good Odunze has been to begin the year, you have to wonder if all of a sudden Dallas's focus goes to Odunze and they lack with DJ Moore and allows him to find some open space and some big plays. Okay, so that was point number 2. Point number 3 for DJ Moore going off, the tight ends aren't doing anything. At the beginning of the season and even this offseason, the talk really for me was who's going to be the guy. Like, you drafted Colston Loveland at the top of the first round, so he's got to be a guy that you're going to get involved. You've got DJ Moore. You've got Rome Odunze. Obviously, you've got Cole Kmet as well still. How are the target percentages going to match up? Well, to begin the year, the targets aren't going to the tight ends. Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland really aren't doing very much. Colston Loveland in particular. So that's leaving, hopefully, more opportunities to get DJ Moore going. So like I said, maybe it is just a gut feeling. I would say it's the Taco Bell that I had last night, but I didn't have Taco Bell last night, so it certainly isn't that. I feel like DJ Moore, this has to be his week, and I could end up being completely wrong on this, and that's what I get for trying to trust a Chicago Bear. But at the end of the day, the matchup, plus everything else that I mentioned, it just feels like it's way too much in DJ Moore's favor. Kyler Murray has been really interesting to start the year because his ceiling isn't there. Has he been a bad quarterback? No, he hasn't been a bad quarterback to begin the year. 15 fantasy points has been his floor, 18.5 fantasy points has been his ceiling. And going up against San Francisco this week, it is a little bit of a tougher matchup. They're allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks to begin the season. But it's the rushing that's an issue for Kyler Murray right now, not throwing the ball. He's only ran for 70 yards in 2 games, and my first instinct was, well, he's not running the football nearly as much as he has in the past, and that's not accurate, actually, because he has 14 combined attempts throughout the first 2 games of the season. He's actually running more this season. He's averaging 7 attempts per game over the course of the first 2 weeks. Last year, he only averaged 5 attempts per game. It's actually the yards per carry that has gone down, because right now he's averaging 5 yards per carry. Last year, he averaged 7.5 yards per carry. but people draft Kyler Murray because of his rushing upside. That adds the opportunity for Kyler Murray to reach top 12 potential every single week. As just strictly a passer, you're not seeing many weeks where he reaches his ceiling. So you gotta wonder, this week against San Francisco, does he pick up more yards on the ground? Is he a little bit better when it comes to yards per carry? And can he make some bigger plays with his feet, especially potentially finding the end zone? If he can, he'll be solid. But this week, I gotta list him as a landmine. To begin the season, the rushing ability just hasn't been there, and that's what he needs to be higher with his ceiling. Isaiah Pacheco just doesn't seem to have it anymore, and maybe it's something that's going to take a while for it to come back, but since he returned from a fractured fibula last year, he has not been good. So far this year, he has 3.4 and 3.8 fantasy points. This week, he gets the New York Giants, who are allowing over 30 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. It is a great matchup for Isaiah Pacheco, but he's had some solid matchups and he hasn't done anything with them. Since returning last season, he hasn't ran for more than 55 yards in a game, and he hasn't scored a touchdown either. Kareem Hunt was brought back for a reason, and even though he's not the big play guy that he used to be, he's still fairly consistent with the production that he puts out. And it's going to be interesting if Isaiah Pacheco starts to lose more and more touches to him if he can't start breaking some bigger plays. And Isaiah Pacheco, like I said, has a great matchup, so it is conceivable that he could end up going nuclear this week. And if he does, that is excellent. I am not rooting for this guy to fail. However, based on the large sample size of games since basically the latter third of last season, I can't with Isaiah Pacheco right now. I think he needs to find a permanent spot on the bench until you see more consistent production and better upside from him. I noticed in the comment section of my wide receiver start and sit analysis that there was some mention of the Baltimore defense. And there was also some mention of, hey Kyle, I feel like you're not giving Baltimore a fair shake here. Because I did mention the fact that Baltimore is allowing 37.05 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and I had kind of mentioned how the first couple of games of the season went for them. But the response to me was, well, really they gave up a ton of those yards at a certain point to the Buffalo Bills, and outside of that, they've been really good. And I get that. I'm not trying to say that they haven't been good, and I'm not trying to say that they've been awful. But as of right now, the numbers show that they've given up quite a few fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And even though that may have only come against the Buffalo Bills, now they get the Detroit Lions, who put up over 50 points last week. In week 1, Baltimore allowed over 50 fantasy points to the Buffalo wide receivers. And that group of wide receivers, you could probably argue, and Buffalo fans don't kill me, is not as good as the weapons that the Lions have. When you look at what Buffalo does with Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, and then Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Josh Palmer, if you're going to argue that Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Isaac Tesla, Jahmyr Gibbs are not nearly as good, that would be a really interesting argument. So if you don't think so, let me know down in the comments below. Let's have a discussion about this. Whose offense is better, removing the quarterback from the situation? Because clearly Josh Allen is better than Jared Goff. But when you look at just pure talent standpoint, is it the Buffalo Bills from the skill positions, or is it the Detroit Lions from the skill positions? But I digress. I just thought that was an interesting thought, and in the moment while I was recording, that wasn't scripted. I went completely off script there. I thought to myself, I wonder if people do think the Buffalo Bill wide receivers and skill position players are better than Detroit. But again, neither here nor there. We know Josh Allen is better, and he makes everyone around him better. Jared Goff, pretty freaking solid too. But this week for Jameson Williams, it's about that big play. Exactly what we saw last week, right? And that's what it has been for the past year. Jameson Williams is going to get deep play opportunities, and he's going to burn a defense every once in a while. And given the fact that Amon-Ra St. Brown had a huge game last week, a lot of attention will be on him. Given the fact that Sam Laporta is going into a matchup that has benefited tight ends so far, that's going to be really good for him. And you got to pay attention to the run game as well. Jameson Williams could absolutely have another one of those huge plays. Am I the only one that feels completely out on the Cleveland offense this week? Because Green Bay made Detroit and then Jaden Daniels at times miserable during the first couple of weeks of the season. And even as a Lions fan, I know when I can tip my cap to a really good team, and Green Bay is the better team as of right now. That defense is going to be very good. And as Micah Parsons feels better and better and better with his back, it's going to get more and more scary. The biggest issue is Joe Flacco is not mobile. He might be less mobile than what Jared Goff is at this point, and we saw how that turned out in week 1. So this week for Jerry Jeudy, he was a fringe start for me because I do feel like Cleveland is going to have to focus on getting the ball out quick. Don't let him sit back in the pocket. Don't let him hold it for too long. It's one of the reasons why I have Cedric Tillman is a sit this week, but I think Jerry Jeudy is closer to being a landmine than going nuclear. I mean, so far his points this season haven't been great. He's got 7.1 and 9.1. And right now, Green Bay is allowing 31.1 to opposing wide receivers. And by the way, if you didn't know it, that's wide receivers as a whole. That's not just the wide receiver one on that team. That's how many points wide receivers are putting up as a whole against Green Bay. So yeah, I just don't trust that Joe Flacco is going to have enough time to throw, and I just don't trust that Jerry Jeudy is going to have enough time to get open for bigger plays. So for this week, I've got to list him as a landmine. I also had a couple of interesting interactions in the comments this week because I made some comments during a couple of my videos about like Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield, Cam Ward, and how well they were playing. And someone was like, excuse me, Cam Ward is not playing well because these are how many fantasy points he's had so far this season. And I responded and I said, being really good for fantasy football and being really good for just pure football purposes are two completely different things. You can be a very good real life NFL quarterback and you're not going to put up a ton of fantasy points. And that's actually what's kind of happened with Matthew Stafford to begin this season. Because so far this year, he's only thrown one interception. He's got multiple touchdown passes. He's thrown for 245 and 298 yards passing. But the problem is he's only been the QB 19 and the QB 20 to begin the year. Again, he's been really, really good for real life NFL purposes. He's exactly what the Rams need. He's pushing the ball down the field. He's making plays. His wide receivers are making plays. He's great. That's why the Rams have a great shot at winning consistently every single week. But from a fantasy standpoint, he doesn't have a really high ceiling right now. And because of that, I'm going to list him as a landmine this week against Philadelphia, who's been a really solid defense so far to begin the year. We know that they're very good in the secondary. We know that they can get after the quarterback. And we know that if it weren't for a couple of weeks ago, Jalen Carter getting thrown out of that game, that could have looked a little bit differently. We know, yeah, Patrick Mahomes burnt them on the ground a little bit, but outside of one really big passing touchdown, he didn't do a ton through the air. Philadelphia has the opportunity to kind of keep Matthew Stafford right around this QB 20 area. And because of that, he's way closer to being a landmine than he is to going nuclear. Headliner Nation, this is now the third week that we have done this video. So in the comments down below, let me know what you think of it. Do you like the information the way it's presented? Is there something else you wish that was in the video? Is there something that you really don't care about? At the end of the day, as a reminder, this is not a start and sit video. So if you have a player in your lineup like Kyler Murray, and you're like, well, Kyle's got him listed as a landmine, I gotta take him out, that might not be necessarily true for your lineup. And that's why you can ask questions in the comments. You can become a member and you can send those questions in Discord, come to the live show on Friday and Sunday mornings, let us know what you're thinking there, and we'll try to help you out with your lineup as much as possible. This video is just really all about trying to determine which players have the best shot at their ceiling this week and which players are much closer to their floor. For now, Headliner Nation, though, hit the like button on the way out. Make sure you subscribe, become a member, turn on the bell notifications, leave comments, everything that you can think of. Do it right now. but more importantly, stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.